Well, greetings class. We made it to the last week of COUN4306, Wisdom Literature of Proverbs and Ecclesiastes. I hope you've memorized this by now. If anybody asks you, what makes biblical counseling different than any other kind of counseling? Well, we believe in the sufficiency of Scripture. That Scripture has answers for all things that have to do with living life and living it in a godly way. We believe in the theology of progressive sanctification, that we're all on a journey as believers of learning how to become more Christ-like. We make progress towards it. We have setbacks. We have more progress. But over time, we become more Christ-like. And the Bible tells us how to do that. It gives us instructions for how to grow and change to become more Christ-like. Those three tenets define the boundaries for biblical counseling. And this course, like many of the others, is an opportunity for you to apply a lot of the wisdom that you're learning in Proverbs and Ecclesiastes into your lives as a part of your own journey towards being more Christ-like. Nothing has changed here in the grading policy. There are 1,000 points available to you, and we do have these fractional plus and minus grades going on, so I've included this in the notes every week, and of course it's in the syllabus as well. This is the schedule in a nutshell. This is a week where I'm giving you a little vacation from the quizzes and the discussion board and the papers that you've been writing. I do still want you to journal because there are a few things to read, and there is the final exam as well. And so there's only those two things really, and the final exam is really a final paper, not a final exam. Now, I've heard my phone beep a couple times, so I'm going to turn the volume down. So that shouldn't happen again. Sorry about that. Should have done that before I started. Now, on to the next page. So here's the actual table from the syllabus with all the things that we've covered. The first week we looked at what the Proverbs say about the fear of the Lord. Second week we looked at moral purity as it's discussed in Proverbs. Week 3 we looked at money, finances, one of my favorites. I loaded some extra things in there for you from my background teaching for Crown Financial Ministries. Communication we talked about, and we ended with what does Proverbs say about child training. And then in week 6 we had an introduction to Ecclesiastes, and then we read the middle chunk of Dr. Constable's commentaries, and we are going to finish up his commentary this week. Each week we do this short video looking at last week's assignments, this week's assignments, and this week we'll not have a sneak peek of next week because this is the end. This is the end of this final piece. You can have this put behind you and you can sleep late on Saturday morning. Every week we read from our textbooks and some other sources, some of them from biblical counseling, some of them from just the science of things that are going on in this arena. And then you have a journal and a discussion board, quizzes almost every week, and weekly papers and special assignments. Those are all done as of the end of week 7, and now you just have the final exam and the journaling. So I'd like you to read for a third time all 12 chapters of Ecclesiastes and then finish up Dr. Constable's notes. For week 7 for your paper, I'm going to go over the feedback on this because it's relevant to the final paper you're going to be putting in. Now, about half of you read the feedback I gave you last week, must have listened to the video, and you corrected the things I was asking for, that you clearly label the different areas of your essays. A couple of you still didn't do that. You still had one giant paragraph. A couple of you wrote excellent thesis statements. I almost cried, but a couple of you didn't at all. And so for you, in the rubric, I wrote, based on the body of your essay, an example of what a good thesis statement would be. So go look at that, and I want you to model after that for your final paper. So when I read that first paragraph, I say, man, that's a great thesis statement, 10 out of 10, 20 out of 20, whatever the points are in the rubric. And I can move on without having to think about what's missing when I'm grading it. So make my life easier, make your grade better, invest some time in making sure you know how to write a good thesis statement. You're a senior at Arlington Baptist University, some of you graduating shortly. By now you should know how to write a good thesis statement. That's why I'm picking on you while I have you under my control for this brief period of time. So now, work on those thesis statements. Work on better outlines of the main body of your paper. Now, we've had kind of generic rubrics here because you're writing on a topic of your own choice. So I didn't go to the point of naming specifically what paragraph should be labeled. In fact, there's one rubric that says for the whole body, but I'm expecting you to have 2 or 3 or 4 different sections in that main body of this paper, especially a paper of this size, because this is a longer research paper. So I want you to have a bold, underlined, outlined title at the beginning of each section that summarizes what's in there. It's a relevant title. It's not just point 1, point 2, point 3, or here's what Ecclesiastes verse 3 says versus verse 4 says. It is something meaningful, such as the sufficiency of Scripture, or the power of the rod in raising a child. Something that describes what's in the paragraph and gives you some inkling of the position you took. Because if you're against spanking, you're not going to say the power of, so that kind of tells you which way you're leaning. Now, these headings of the main body should be components in your thesis statement in the introduction. In this paper, I'm going to analyze biblically the raising of children by looking at the power of the rod, by looking at, and list all the things that you're doing. So I can see the whole outline of the paper in that thesis statement, that last sentence in the introduction. Okay? So having a better outline makes it easier to write a good thesis statement. Make sense? Now, you fixed this problem this week in week 7. Week 6, there were a number of you that in your papers and in your special projects, you said Scripture tells us, and you laid out a perfectly valid biblical principle, but you did not put a citation. I want to know, what book did it come from? What chapter did it come from? What verse did it come from? In week 7, you fixed that. So making sure you double check and do that well in your final project. Don't get sloppy about saying, Scripture demands that we have church discipline. Where? 66 books in the Bible. I don't know where to start looking as an ignorant reader. Assume your readers are ignorant. Point them to the direction where it backs it up scripturally. All right. For the discussion board, we had a discussion about the question, why do bad things happen to good people? And we asked you to use scripture references, at least one of them from Ecclesiastes, in doing that. So it was a pleasure to read those. Your special assignment, I have the same instructions here that I just went over on the paper, so I'm not going to go over that. Although I will say I enjoyed reading these stories of times where you did something right and you suffered negative consequences to it. In fact, it was in a couple of these where I wrote a thesis statement that I thought was missing in your paper, so make sure you go look at that in the feedback. You should either see an attaboy, attagirl, or a suggestion for how to fix it. Then, so now for week 8. For your reading assignment and your journaling, the final 33% of Constable's notes, starting at the value and limitations and the wisdom of chapter 8, all the way through the end of chapter 12. Then there's an article, mostly for your amusement, on progressive revelation, the dash, and also the two brothers. So there's 3 extra readings there. And so there's lecture 8 by Dale Canwright to read and journal on that as well. There is no discussion board. I'm lightening your load a little since you have so much to focus on that final project, because that's a 5 to 7 page article. A research paper could be turned into a brochure at the end, using a scenario with Proverbs or Ecclesiastes or both. And then, of course, the course evaluation. Everything is due this Friday, March 6th at 11:50 p.m. I have to turn in grades, I believe, 1 week after that, the 13th. I know some of you have struggled with getting things in on time. You may still turn things in up until I turn in the grades. So you may not have a full 10 days, 10% per day penalty. to get this done. So just so you know, but if you missed the Friday night deadline, go ahead and finish your work and turn it in Saturday and take the 10% penalty. It's better than not getting those points. Now, I've gone over this several times, so I'm not going to go over it in great detail this time, because hopefully you've already begun and you've chosen one of these two options. But option one is to write this brochure on a topic of your choice and write it in such a way that you could hand it to a counselee, and it should have a lot of high-level information about the topic, and it should have a list of resources that they can go read. I do want you to cite any sources that you use, and when you cite them, I want the book, the chapter name, the chapter number, and the page number where that quote can be found. Option two is a 5 to 7 page account of a counseling scenario, and so you give the details of the case, and then I would use the key elements of biblical counseling as your outline there. That way you make sure you've covered them all, and it gives a clear delineation again for me to make it easier to grade, makes it easier for the reader to read. Follow the rubric as usual, and that brings our course to a close. So God bless you. I hope you have a new revitalized appreciation for Proverbs and Ecclesiastes, these books of wisdom that God has given us. There's so much application in them. I use them frequently in lots of different scenarios in counseling cases. So having a good command of what they say is very valuable. God bless you. Some of you I'll probably see in a future class. Some of you are going off and graduating, and it's been good knowing you during this time. And it's been a pleasure to serve the Biblical Counseling Movement at Arlington Baptist University. Take care.